All right. So thank you for coming here today. When I was younger, I had a little bit of a voice problem. I couldn't speak clearly. I had sort of an effeminate voice, and at first I didn't notice. But over time, I heard from, I traveled to some new place, and someone would be like, "Hey, what's wrong with your voice?" And then it kind of stood out to me. As you can imagine, that gave me a little bit of a stigma. It made it difficult to present and to do public speaking, because if anyone during the presentation is like having a little laugh or a giggle, like I immediately think, "Oh man, are they laughing at me? Like, did I say something stupid? Like, should I actually be up here at the front of the stage?" Well, over the years, it's got better. The voice problem I was having kind of went away and resolved itself. And now, delivering presentations is my job. It's the majority of what I do at Pantheon. It is presenting and leading training workshops with groups of people. And so that's why I'm happy to be here today and share a little bit about overcoming nerves, a little bit about how to get out in front of people and have opportunities to do public speaking, and a little bit on preparing slides and how to communicate clearly. Though my goal for this presentation is that it would apply to any sort of presentation, not just a slide-driven presentation at a conference or a camp, but also when you're giving some sort of a meeting at work, you have a few colleagues or something like that. All right, so let me jump into introductions. My name is Needham. I'm a developer advocate at Pantheon. The thing I love about being a developer advocate specifically is I sort of sit between the developers outside of Pantheon and the developers inside of Pantheon. I take all of the expertise I have working for Pantheon and teach it to people outside, and then I take all of the experience I gained from being in the community and volunteering my time and coming to conferences, and I take it back to Pantheon so that we're making good decisions on what new features we're building and products we're selling, all of that stuff. All right, so let's jump first into just a few tips, suggestions to kind of get us started. I'm starting by suggesting that you practice, and this might be obvious. It can't be understood enough, and that's why I'm leading with it. Practice is immensely important. I recommend when you're creating your presentation and you're thinking you're about ready to go, that you run through it from start to finish. It's sort of tempting to practice by, okay, I'm going to start, and then like, oh, I found a mistake, let me stop, and you fix that mistake, and then come back. But the results, the conclusion are, at the end of the day, you end up perfecting the beginning and never really practicing the end. So practice it from start to finish. When you get through it from start to finish, pay attention to your timing. I have 45 minutes to deliver this talk, and I'm hoping to have some time for questions, so aiming for that. Be aware of that. Most of the time, especially early on when you start presenting, you'll be amazed how quickly you can get through your slides. And maybe that means you need to slow down. Maybe it means you need to pause in between the different things that you're saying, your different points. Or maybe it means that you actually need to add a little bit more content. All those things can be true. And then, of course, make corrections. It's also a good idea to show it to a friend, to someone that you trust. Run through it from start to finish, presenting it to someone. And use that to get feedback. But also, don't be afraid to project their feedback. At this point, consider yourself the expert on what it is that you're talking about. Giving feedback is important, accepting that feedback, appreciating it. But also, I want to say it out loud that it is okay to disagree with feedback. It's okay to say things in a way that makes sense to you and describe it in a way that makes sense to you, even if someone says it's not necessarily the best way. Because ultimately, you need to believe in yourself. And I don't want to be too lovey-dovey or fluffy on this, but like imposter syndrome is a real thing. I mentioned at the beginning, the problem with talking and whatever. Like it led to a lot of imposter syndrome throughout my career. When I was presenting, when I'm not presenting, all these different things. But everyone deals with some degree of imposter syndrome, and it's that feeling of I'm not supposed to be here. I'm not qualified to be here doing this thing that I'm doing right now. But you have to remember, as you're going through and preparing this topic, that you've done research. At this point, if you're kind of going in this order, you've done a little bit of practice. You feel confident about this presentation. And you've already gotten some feedback, you've made some revisions. At this point, you're probably a more qualified expert to talk about this topic than most anyone else at the conference you're going to or at your colleagues' work. And so you also have to remember that at a talk like this, where people have options on what talk they can go to, there are people in your room. People are picking the topic that you're in because it's a topic that they're interested in. You guys are here today because you are interested in learning about delivering presentations. And you should use that to kind of fire yourself up, get yourself excited when people show up and are mutually interested in a topic like this. So when I was in the 4th grade, I started playing the trombone. Over the years, I participated in pep band, marching band, orchestra, different things like that. And I pretty regularly made mistakes. I was up there on stage, I'm playing along, and I'll make some wrong note or something. And I'm like, oh man, like I ruined the concert. I made such a massive mistake. Like, I'm never going to hear the end of this. My parents in the audience are going to be embarrassed that I'm their son, and I made this huge mistake. I might be exaggerating a little bit, but at the time, it doesn't feel that way. Like, that's legitimately how it comes down. But at the end of the day, like, you leave the concert and you're like, oh man, I'm so sorry I made a mistake. And everyone is like, what mistake? I didn't even notice. I didn't hear a mistake. So even though you might have noticed a mistake, no one else did. And this happens all the time in presentations. Maybe you accidentally forget a slide. Maybe you skip over an important point. Unless you specifically draw attention to it and really point it out or like apologize, oh, I'm sorry, I need to do this, whatever. No one will notice. They'll just think it's a normal part of your presentation, and you can just continue on. Just kind of roll with the punches. It's also important to get excited about your topic. Now, if you're proposing that you're giving some sort of talk, it's probably something you're interested in, you have some experience in it. So if you get up in front of people and you're talking about a topic that you're genuinely interested in and you're excited about sharing this topic with people, it's going to show. Your face is going to be happy, you're going to be presenting in a sort of flexible, casual sort of way, and people will feed off of that energy, and it will make them enjoy the presentation more. So getting excited, getting yourself, almost forcing yourself to feel like, yes, I'm ready, I'm pumped up, this is going to work, will help you give a better presentation. Some ways that you can get excited is having a routine beforehand. If you are expected to give presentations on a pretty regular basis, then having a routine that gets yourself pumped up is really important. One of my colleagues, Dwayne Daniel, gives talks just about every weekend. He travels from WordCamp to WordCamp and Drupal Camp to Drupal Camp, all sorts of other events. And he speaks all the time. And he has a routine that he goes through. Some people will put in their earbuds and play the same song every time. Some people go get their favorite drink. Other people will do some sort of special reading or just quiet time. Whatever works for you. You need to find the thing that will get yourself energized and ready for the presentation. And then just do that. Make time for that before every presentation. Another way you can get excited is actually talking to your audience before the presentation. I didn't do this today, but something I like to do is actually, while in that sort of awkward time, where the speaker's sort of just standing here and waiting, is it time yet? No. Okay, well, what am I going to do? Use that time to go around and talk to people. Find out who they are, where they're from, what they're there for, what are they interested in talking about. Hearing why people are there will often get you pumped up and ready. And there's another trick in here is that you will naturally feel calmer about presenting in a space like this when you hear your voice before you jump in. Your voice kind of sounds weird when you're up at the front and there's this echo and stuff, but just by simply talking in a room before you present will naturally help your nerves come down a little bit. And then, of course, give more presentations. There's lots of ways that you can get involved by giving presentations. One way is by joining a local Toastmasters group. There are hundreds, if not thousands, of Toastmasters clubs all over the world. It's where a group of people come together, usually every week or every other week, to share, to give impromptu speeches, sometimes to give prepared speeches. And you'll have a team of people there that help give feedback, that will give you suggestions on how to improve your public speaking. They'll do things like check the number of nervous tics that you have. If you say or like or whatever those trigger words are, they'll track those for you so that you can be aware of them. They'll also make suggestions like maybe you should move around a little bit. Don't be tethered to the podium. That's in particular one of the problems that I have, so I'd like to try to practice that. So doing something like Toastmasters is really good. Also, just getting involved in your local community, wherever your local community is. It might be a WordPress meetup. It might be some other meetup. Since we're at a EDU related, you might be at a university. Maybe there's a meetup on campus that has events like this. Definitely use whatever experience you have to find interest groups around topics that you would like to learn more about or that you'd like to speak on, and start attending. Go check it out. Volunteer to share some topic. But it's important to remember that even if you are just getting started in some presentation or some technology or some tools, that you have something to share. Even if you've just started, a couple weeks ago, it's extremely valuable to share what you've learned in these last couple weeks. Like, what were the roadblocks to you getting started with WordPress or something like that? It's not all about, public speaking isn't all about sharing these advanced topics or sharing these technical topics or sharing these in-depth whatever topics. There's a huge sort of missing section of topics around beginner topics, around those topics like, what are my favorite plugins for this, or my favorite theme for this, or how do I install WordPress? If you're having trouble, if you'd like to start getting going, giving presentations at camps or conferences or meetups, check out, just find some beginner topics that you would feel comfortable presenting on, and be sure to propose those. Another idea is that you don't have to necessarily go to a camp or a conference or whatever alone. Bring a friend. That'll help you feel more confident to have someone in the audience that that you can look to and get some sort of happy visual, friendly face. That helps immensely. But you can also co-present with someone. If you feel nervous about missing points or I don't know if I can do this all by myself, get someone that you can tag team with up on the stage. Someone that you have a friendly rapport with that you can kind of just casually present with. Ultimately, this is a great way to get out in your community, to meet people, and to slowly, little by little, sort of become an industry expert or someone who becomes knowledgeable in those topics that you're trying to kind of get some experience with. So back in January of 2008, I gave my first talk. It was at Drupal Camp, Wisconsin, in Milwaukee. And at that point, I had only been using Drupal for about 2 months. I was in college at the time, and I had installed it. I had used it for my class, and I had all sorts of problems with it, but I had something to share. I could share the little bit of experience that I had with it. And I was using a module or equivalent to a plugin, called UberCart, which is kind of like WooCommerce. It's setting up an e-commerce store. And I just gave a basic intro to UberCart, intro to Drupal class or session, and it went really well. I was surprised. I had friends there from college, and my professor that was there to kind of encourage me, to give me feedback along the way, and it was a great experience for me. So that's where I started. All the way up to last month, I gave a talk at WordCamp EU. And this was probably the, most prestigious or whatever, biggest talk I've ever given for the most people. And it was a talk about Drupal for WordPress folks. And so I felt a little conscious about standing up in front of a WordPress conference talking about Drupal, both because, I didn't want to offend or make the audience get defensive talking about a different CMS, but I also wanted to represent the Drupal community well, and not, if a Drupal person watches it later, I didn't want them to get defensive either or get, offended that I said something wrong or whatever. So after going through my slides and preparing, I I was feeling this like pressure and like uncertainty on if this was going to work out well and if I was communicating clearly. So I just got some feedback. I looked at some Drupal people, some WordPress people. I had friends in both communities, and I asked them just to let me run through my slides with them. Let me talk through it and make sure that everything was okay. And with their feedback, I was able to rewrite things, and I ended up with a talk that I feel pretty good about. So that's one thing. We'll talk just next about thinking about your audience and being sure that you're speaking clearly to the audience that you're trying to communicate to. But another technique, definitely jumping into beginner topics in an area that you're already familiar with is one thing. But you could also jump into a different community and share beginner topics on something you're familiar with. So if you feel like maybe there's not a WordPress community around you, maybe there's a PHP community around you, maybe there's a JavaScript community around you, some other community, you can get out and share what little bit that the beginner topic in a different place. And that's also totally valid. All right, so let's consider, who is my audience? Well, today my audience is WPCampus. It's all of you guys who are here right now, plus everyone who is joining us online right now. That's important. Anytime that you're preparing for a presentation, try to think very carefully about the type of people that will be at your presentation. Try to think, am I talking to my 5 colleagues who are developers and relatively technical? Am I speaking to the leadership team who maybe isn't technical but has a much broader picture on the company? Or am I speaking to 200 people in a big lecture hall or something like that? The answer to those questions will drastically change how you're presenting and how your slides need to be structured. One thing that you can do to help with this is by creating personas. Creating basically fake users, or if you know them, real users who will be in your audience that you can think about as you're presenting or as you're preparing your slides. So this is my friend John. He is a project manager at Hook 42. He's from Arizona and he likes board games. He loves to play board games. He loves to teach board games. He would come to a presentation like this because he wants to become a better project manager. He wants to communicate clearly with his team and with his clients. And secondarily, he wants to feel more confident about actually taking the plunge and presenting at a conference or at a camp or something like that. So with John in mind, as I'm preparing my slides, I might use certain analogies or I might use certain examples. So for example, here's a slide with the board game Settlers of Catan. Because I know that my audience, in this case, I'm thinking of John, likes board games and you're familiar with board games, I might use an analogy that works for them best. So I might show this slide and I might say, when you play a board game with the same group of people multiple times, you get to know how they might react to certain things. You might start to figure out their tricks or how you can change your strategy so that you can beat them or so that you can more adequately address what they're trying to do. And really kind of adapt your strategy. So what if you took this board game and you played it with a different group of people? You would probably change your strategy. You wouldn't use the same tricks that you would use on your best friend that you're playing with or your usual group. And presentations are the same way. It's important to think about the group of people that you're presenting to and change your topic every time. I've given this talk a few times and I change it every single time because I think about the groups of people that I'm presenting to. And there might be subtle differences, but it's important to think about that and make those changes. So naturally, if John was in the crowd, this analogy might work really well with him. It might resonate because he's familiar and he's been in that situation before. So it's just something that's good to think about. All right, so this is a big one. So we're going to start talking a little bit about slides and specifically like how to communicate through your slides. But it's really important that you think, maybe this should have been my first slide, but don't read your slides. People who are watching you present are here to listen to you. They're not here to read what you're writing up on the screen. If they were here to read, you could send them an email or you could just have a PDF and give them a PDF and that would be your presentation. They're here to listen to you and to hear your stories and all of those things. Also, a lot of people, myself included, will often start by using slides as sort of a cheat, like a cheat sheet. Like don't use your slides as your speaker notes. Don't look and read from your slides. That's not the best way to go. Like, they're not here for you. The slides are really visual aids to help move the story along. Sometimes, like with the board game picture, it can be a full screen image, and that image can remind you of the story that you wanted to relate. And that can be a trick to kind of keep things going. I'm also making use of presenter notes just to make sure I don't miss any bullet points, but I'm being very, very careful not to read my speaker notes. It's important to kind of look up at your audience, kind of scan the room to try to make eye contact with each person as you're going around. If you're just reading your computer or reading your screen, it ends up not being a very engaging presentation. Another thing to consider is, what is the main point? Like, why are you actually presenting? What do you want your audience to leave the presentation with? How should they be thinking differently, or what should the call to action be? One area that I think the main point can really be lost is when you have data slides, like this graph with all this data. Now, sometimes it's inevitable. You have to show slides with graphs and with data and with numbers, and that's okay. They can be really engaging. It can really illustrate a point by having slides like this. But as it is right now, who knows what my point is by showing this slide? There's a bunch of cool numbers and graphs and stuff, but it could be, oh, our numbers drop for watching these videos on the weekend because probably people aren't working. Or maybe it's that, oh, the getting started video has the most plays. Like, well, actually, what I was trying to get at with this is that our newest, our generate SSH key one, people are actually getting through that one the most. People are playing that more than any other video at the moment. And this is using our new format that we had designed specifically to attract more people to view it. So this is success. So you might use it by doing something like I'm doing here to highlight. You might have text, you might have whatever, but making sure that people are focusing only on the bits that are important, not getting distracted by all the other numbers. In fact, I could probably do more to hide some of the other numbers or the points that don't matter as much to the illustration. And there's a quote. I wish I had the author. I think it's actually from Slideology, a book that I have in my reference that you guys can definitely go check out. But it says that data slides are not really about the data. They're about the meaning of the data. Now, you're not showing a slide with graphs and numbers and stuff just because you want to show them graphs and numbers. You're showing them that illustration because you have a point that you're trying to make with those numbers. So focus on the point. Now, I've used a graph and table here because that's easy to illustrate, and I think everyone can relate to seeing those slides with just lots of data on it. But this can be true for anything. It can be true for just images or other things. Like, getting to the point and illustrating that point clearly is something that should be a big focus as you're creating your slides. It's also important to use value statements. So why does the listener actually care about a particular thing that I'm saying? How does the particular point that I'm trying to make actually benefit the audience or the person I'm talking to? Be sure to drive that point home so that they don't leave the presentation wondering what they were trying to get out of it or what the point is. Like, make it crystal clear. So one example, one way that you can do this is by using value statements, by making it a little bit emotional, by using stories. So one example, I could spend hours talking about using Pantheon along with Lando, which is a local container-based development environment. And I could go through all the features. I could talk about the pros and cons and benefits and why you should use it. But I'm going to just tell you a story. I hate wasting time spinning up new environments. I hate the process of onboarding someone new. I hate the process of onboarding myself when I start a new project and I have to download all the different pieces. I have to set up my environment. By using Pantheon and Lando, I'm able to keep all of my site in Pantheon. I'm able to use Lando, quick little command line interface. And within 5 minutes, I can go from having nothing, like a brand new wiped computer, to having a fully functional local website on containers that is exactly the same as it would be live on the website. I could go to my colleague, install it on their computer, and in 5 minutes, they would have a copy of that too. So telling a story, giving an illustration is much more engaging and much more impactful than just giving the numbers or just sharing the facts. Another example. So one thing that really, really frustrates clients is when you lose their content, right? So let's say we are currently developing some new feature, the website's live, we think everything's fine, so we clone the database up onto the live site so we can move our configuration up onto that site and all of our configuration is done. Well, little did we know, the client was in the process of drafting a new blog post when we overwrote that live database. And they are upset. It took them a lot of work and it's all completely gone. Okay, well, that could all have been mitigated if they had been using the WPCFM plugin. WPCFM takes configuration out of the database, saves it into code so that you can move it with version control from one environment to the other, and then import it into a new environment. So rather than overwriting the live database, they can move the configuration around, import it into the new place, and not have to worry about ever overwriting that database again. All right, so again, I could go through the benefits, the pros, the features of using WPCFM, but just with a simple little story, I can share the really critical piece, the thing that actually matters to me about it. And that leads to telling compelling stories. And a good way, a good presentation technique is being sure to, along the way, have stories that you can remember, that you can recite on demand. People love to hear stories, and so it can be a really good way to help people remember the points of your presentation as you're going. Specifically, stories about people are especially compelling. People can relate to other people. So anytime you can share a story about actual people, that's good. Another way you can do this is by using case studies, real world examples of something that happened. So one case study that we have been using at Pantheon is the ACLU. So during the election, the ACLU saw a huge spike in traffic, like on a regular basis, a lot more traffic. But the biggest spike was on January 28th after the big travel ban. So after the travel ban, they saw a spike in traffic that was 85 times their normal traffic. Like not double, 85 times their normal traffic. Since then, since that travel ban happened, the spike in traffic has sustained at 20 to 30 times their normal amount. And on that day, or on that weekend that this happened, they received 6 times their yearly budget in donations. Okay, 6 times their entire yearly budget on that one weekend. The reason this worked is because they were on Pantheon. They scaled. They did not have any downtime during this traffic spike because they were using our tools, and I'm not going to go into a sales pitch, but it worked. They didn't have any downtime, and as a result, the ACLU loves Pantheon. They love the service that we provide. Okay, so that's a real-world example, case study. You guys can reference it. Anytime that you can share real facts, stories like this, it can be really engaging and really helpful to get your point across. Another thing to consider is, can this be simplified? Anytime that you can simplify your slides, anytime that you can simplify the points that you're trying to make, you will pretty significantly focus in on the points that you're trying to make, and so those points will carry across. I've already mentioned slides, but remember this slide with the story with my friend John, who likes board games? This slide didn't start like this. As I was going and kind of thinking about how to illustrate this, this is how this slide started. Now, how many people have created presentations with slides that look just like this? Bullets, lots of text, maybe lots of numbers. I still do this sometimes. I try not to, because I know that, again, people don't want to read the screen. They're here to listen to you. If you have lots of text, they're going to be reading that. You're probably not paying attention now because there's a slide with text on it. It's okay. But over time, you can help kind of wean yourself off of slides like this just by introducing maybe an image, maybe refine the text that you're trying to do and include an image. So maybe you kind of go towards something like this. Your main points are up on the screen, but you still have the image. You're kind of weaning off of the bullets. You're weaning off of those text points. But I still might have those bullets in my speaker notes, so I don't miss anything. Or I might have a shortened, condensed version of my speaker notes. And then once you got this, and maybe you don't even need the text anymore, because again, people will read the text instead of paying attention to you. You can get rid of the text completely and just have the image. So you go through this progression of simplification, which really helps, again, your point be focused. It helps people pay attention, and you're able to kind of frame the story in a way that is in your favor. Another thing to consider in regards to simplification is that you can never really be sure how the presentation will be interpreted. And I mean that in regards to, well, a bunch of different ways. One of them is, when you're presenting, are you going to be on a big TV screen or are you going to be on a projector? In this case, we have both. I don't know if you noticed, there's a TV in the back of the room and then projectors in the front of the room. You also don't really know if your audience is going to be in person with you or if they're going to be streaming online, like we have right now. Again, we have both right now, which is a little unusual. I give a lot of presentations and training workshops that are only online. So I know I don't have people in the room in my office with me. It's all on my computer. It's also important to consider recordings, because a lot of the presentations at camps and cons are recorded. So being sure that you are addressing your audience with your slides and simplification, all that stuff, in a way that someone who's watching it, a month, a year later, making sure it's still relevant for them. Ultimately, these are all accessibility concerns. The same accessibility that we are concerned about, and rightfully so, on the web is relevant in presentations. Thinking about things like foreground, background colors, text size, making sure that your images are clearly illustrating, all those things are important when it comes to presentations. One trick for checking the readability of your slides is if you have, let's say on your desk, on your office or whatever, you have a 21-inch monitor. If you kind of set a yardstick or something or a tape measure and you go back 21 inches, basically the same number of the inches of your screen, go that far back and see if you can read the text. Theory states that it should scale, that should go on and on. So if it works at 21 to 21, it should work from the front of the room to the back of the room, in theory. I still like to, before my talk, I arrive early, plug in, go to the back of the room, check. I'll occasionally have to bump up the font and just, because you want to make sure people can read it. All right, and lastly, consider, can this presentation be a little bit more engaging? Okay, one way that you can make sure that the presentation is engaging is just by doing a poll. So raise your hand if you've attended a session where someone has done a hand poll. Yeah, exactly. There's something about engaging the audience directly by asking them to participate in some way that keeps them engaged. A good technique is actually doing a poll at the beginning of the presentation, because not only does the presenter learn a little bit about their audience so they can tailor the presentation to who's actually here, but it also gives the audience a chance to see that they're not alone, that there are people around them that like, oh, I'm not a developer, but I'm a site builder. I'm a designer or whatever. Like, oh, I see. Oh, they're a designer too. Cool. I'm where I'm supposed to be, and helps them to feel a little bit more comfortable. You can also ask for suggestions. So we don't have time to dig in this now, but I would actually wait and say, like, who would like to give a suggestion, like one of their favorite presentation techniques. Instead of doing this now live, jump in on the page. Maybe leave your suggestion in the comments on the page, and maybe we'll go through some of those later. You can also ask for a story. I recommend when it comes to asking for a story, if you're giving the stage to someone for a couple minutes, to actually have someone picked out in advance. Don't just ask for someone to come up and take over the stage. It helps if you can, like, as you're going around and talking to people, ask like, hey, that's a really cool thing that you just told me. Would you mind sharing that with the audience later, or something like that? Or planting someone, having one of your colleagues or someone come in, that also works. And then this is a really important one. You can actually change the perspective of someone just by asking a question. Our brains are wired in sort of a weird way, where if you ask a question, we will answer it. Maybe we don't say the question or the answer to the question out loud, but if I ask you a question, you will answer it in your brain. If you heard the question, you have to answer it. Like, there's no way around it for some reason. So one of the questions I would ask you guys is, how would becoming a better presenter improve your communication with your colleagues? How would being a better presenter improve your job satisfaction? How would getting over your nerves on public speaking make things like that easier? Those are all important things to consider. And if you can work questions like that into your slides, if you can take a moment to ask your audience those questions and they're actually engaged and paying attention, they will shift their perspective a little bit because they're forced to ask themselves those questions and actually think about your presentation critically. All right, and I always like to end on this slide. So I think it's really important to look in the mirror. I don't have time to dig into this a whole lot because of time, but there are a whole bunch of things that I could improve about this presentation. I know like I'm kind of tethered to the podium a little bit. I still have some trigger words I'm working out. Things are getting better, but just by being aware of the problems that you have, problems you have is probably the wrong way to put it, but the things that you can improve, just by being aware of the things that you can improve on your presentation will make you get better at those things. You just become conscious of it. All right, one thing that I want to, like public service announcement, is check out Global Diversity Call for Papers Day. If you are from, or if you're not from St. Louis, check it out, see if there's a local workshop in your area. Specifically, there are workshops geared around helping anyone feel comfortable presenting. So writing your call for papers, coming up with topic ideas, getting ready to actually present. If you are from St. Louis, I'm disappointed that there is no workshop offered here yet. So if you are here and you feel a little bit confident about presenting, please do consider listing a workshop available so that other people can join. Also, of course, the Toastmasters group is a great resource for that. And then also just feel free to reach out to me. I should have mentioned this at the beginning maybe, but I'm David Needham on Twitter. You can check out my website, davidneedham.me. I would be more than happy to help anyone to kind of mentor through creating slides, preparing for a presentation, coming up with a topic idea. Feel free to grab me after the presentation too. I'll be at the Pantheon booth probably all weekend. I'd love to help out any way I can. And then as the call to action, as the final sort of push to you guys, get ready for WPCampus next time. You can actually go on the website right now and say that you would like to be a speaker, and you can pitch an idea. So take a few minutes, come up with a few ideas, pitch them, even though it's not for a little while, and you never know. There's a saying that you don't really know what you don't know, but there are things that you guys do know that other people don't know. So it's important to share those things with the community. So thank you all very much. All right, so there is questions happening on the page if there are any questions.
Questions do not seem to be working on the website, but you guys, of course, can ask them of David here and folks at home can hear them. And folks at home, if you're listening and you have questions, feel free to drop them in the discussion, Discuss WPC 2018 channel and Slack. And I'll keep an eye on that, and we can pass those along to David. So, folks, questions?
Yeah, before we do questions, I just want to mention too my slides here, davidneedham.me/WPCampus 2018. You can also get links to more resources. So, like this last slide here has a whole bunch of articles and books and a podcast that does a great job of explaining some of these public speaking things. So, check those out, and those are also on my website. Okay. Questions? Yes, sir.
So you give these presentations, and then you have the Q&A afterwards. Some audience member asks a question that you have no idea. You encountered that before? I'm guessing you have.
Yeah. So the question is, you give a presentation, you open for questions, and someone asks a question that you are not prepared for. It is totally acceptable to say, man, I have no idea. But if you feel comfortable with it, say, I don't know, but I'm willing to look into it. And if you send me a tweet or an email, I'd love to follow up with you later. Or another way is you can flip it around and say, hey, I don't know this, but who here? Has anyone else dealt with this? Can you share your experience on this particular question? Yeah. Yes, sir.
Is there a threshold for bulleted lists when they're good and when they're bad? I know you mentioned it a little bit in there.
Yeah. Yeah. So the presentation or the question was, is there a threshold for bullets, bulleted slides? Are they good or bad? Or at what point does it become too much? So I would have to refer back to the Slideology book. Like they have some information about like formulas and stuff on specifically like how much data to include on a slide and stuff. But I would almost always lean towards not including bullets unless they're really driving home a point. I use bullets or numbered list for my consider thing. Let me actually jump back. So anytime I have a consider thing, I'm very deliberate about obscuring the ones that are not my point, so that if you do have a bulleted list, either use like an animation or an effect to like make your new point appear. Because if you just have a list, people will read the entire list and then ignore you until you get the next slide. It's just the way it works. But if you can reveal one at a time, that will help. And then if you can semi-obscure the previous question so everyone knows exactly what your point is on this point, then that helps too. Yes, sir.
When you made a mistake when you were playing music, did you throw in the sad trombone sound?
Oh, did I throw in the sad trombone sound when I made a mistake? No, that probably would have made it worse. Yes, sir.
So I came here because I got to give a presentation. And I was looking at my slides last night. In your links there, is there any good resources for finding a decent template that doesn't look boring?
Yeah, so the question was, do I have any resources for finding like slide design templates, things like that? Unfortunately, no. So the Slideology book has suggestions for slide design and how to like think about that stuff. I don't consider myself to be super design oriented. Like I can kind of idea it, but creating it is a little tough for me. So our designer at Pantheon actually created this slide template that we use for most of our presentations. So I usually take the lazy route and just use that. But I mean, you still have to be a little bit creative with like, how do you account for things that aren't part of your template? Because there's always the illustration, the thing you're trying to do that isn't included in one of the 10 options of slides. But yeah, sorry, I don't have a great answer for you there. I think we have time for one question if it's less than 30 seconds. Yes, sir.
How has learning these skills impacted your just in-meeting communication?
How has learning these skills impacted my in-meeting communication? Well, I feel more confident about speaking up, certainly. Like I said, like these presentations are what I do now. I mean, like, the majority of what I do now is talking to people in groups like this. So getting over that fear of public speaking was really important. Remembering that other people are probably where I was before helps a lot too. Also thinking critically about what is my main point? Do I need to speak up right now because is this adding to the point that we're trying to make or not? There's all sorts of techniques that come up with just casual office communication. That's good to know. Yeah, you're welcome. All right, and with that, I think we're at time, right?
Yeah, Jonathan Perlman added a Get Speaking link in there, which WordPress has a couple of good resources for people who have never spoken before and want to start to. And I'm sure you could come and talk to me or David, because I've worked on that too. And then also Jonathan online if you have questions about that. But thank you very much, David. One more round of applause.